If you need to sift through a large amount of data in your flow, ditch the apply to each and condition actions and use the filter array action instead. Using the apply to each action and condition action is inefficient. In this flow example, the apply to each action is looping through each item in this list and checking to see if the employee's birth date is today. I have a small list of only 14 items. If you have a larger list, doing it this way would be time-consuming. The filter array action is a data operation action. This action can help you reduce the number of objects in an array by filtering out the data based on your criteria. By using the filter array action, this flow will first filter out the list of employees based on my criteria. I added a condition to check if any items have been returned before continuing on with the flow. Then I can take the outputs of the filter array action and loop through those items instead. Instead of looping through 14 items, I'm only looping through the items that have been filtered. In this video tutorial, I'll show you 3 practical ways to use the filter array action and how to use it properly. Number 1, cross-referencing data. If you use Power Automate to import Excel data into a SharePoint list, use the filter array action to cross-reference your Excel data with the data that already exists in SharePoint. This can also work for cross-referencing one SharePoint list with another to determine which items to move into a list or which items to delete. The same goes for cross-referencing files in a document library. Number 2, filtering by a key. There are a few actions in Power Automate that don't include a filter query field, such as the get all lists in libraries, get lists, list files in folder, get sections in notebook, list channels, get tables, and many more. Instead of using an apply to each and condition action to see if the items returned match your criteria, use a filter array action instead. Some of the value keys in these actions aren't even accessible through the dynamic content options. The Get All Lists and Libraries action returns all lists and document libraries. Unfortunately, it doesn't include a way to filter the values returned. The dynamic content doesn't even list the type key. With a filter array action, you can filter just the document libraries or lists. Number 3, Substring Matching. The OData filter query in Power Automate doesn't have a contains operator. Use a filter array action to filter your items based on whether a particular string field contains a specific substring. If you have a Power Automate flow that uses a filter array action and looks like this, you are using it wrong. Keep watching to learn how to use this action properly. On my SharePoint site, I have this Excel file where the data has been added to my SharePoint list. I have a new Excel file of data that needs to be imported. This table contains new data as well as the previously imported data. I need to filter out the new data that needs to be added to the SharePoint list so I don't end up creating duplicate list items. In my Excel table, I have a column that stores a custom ID. We'll use the values in this column to cross-reference with the items that already exist in our SharePoint list. The email addresses are also unique in this case, which can also be used if we wanted. Adjust this flow to suit your data. In my flow, I'm going to delete the apply to each action while we test and build out the modifications to this flow. Add a get items action. We'll use this action to return the items from the SharePoint list. Add a select action. We'll use this action to pull the values from the email ID column. The select action will return an array of values. In the from field, insert the values dynamic content from the get items action. Click this icon to switch to text mode. Insert the email ID dynamic content from the get items action here. The select action will return an array of values. Add a join action. We'll use this action to convert the array of values into a string. Don't forget to rename your actions to keep things organized. In the from field, insert the outputs from the select action above. In the join with field, insert a comma and a space. I'll add a scope action to group these actions together. The scope action is optional. I like to use them in my flows to easily collapse multiple actions so it doesn't take up too much vertical space. I'll drag these actions into this scope action. Next, add a filter array action. We'll use this action to filter out the data returned from the list rows present in a table action. In the from field, insert the value dynamic content from the list rows present in a table action. In the first value field, insert the outputs from the join action. Change the operator to does not contain. I'm using a dynamic table in the list rows present in a table action. If you want to know how to do this, make sure you watch this video. The only dynamic content I have available from the list rows present in a table action is the value and body. I'll need to use an expression to access the content returned from that action. I'll insert the item function. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. I'll need to use the values in the ID column of my Excel table. In the outputs of the list rows present in a table action, that column is labeled capital I and D. I'll enter that in between the single quotes. I'll add a compose action before running a test. Whenever I use a filter array action in my flows, I always add a compose action to store the number of items returned from the filter array. This helps with troubleshooting my flow. It also helps me to confirm whether or not I've set up the filter array action correctly. Insert an expression. Use the length function. Insert the body outputs from the filter array action above. The original Excel file that was imported into SharePoint has 27 rows of data. This new file has 50 rows of data. I'm expecting the filter array to return 23 items. Save the flow and give it a test. The output of this filter array action has all the items that need to be added to the SharePoint list. To help you better understand how the filter array action works, I want to break down what is happening in this action. The from field requires an array of items. In my case, it's the values being returned from the list rows present in a table action. The first value field contains the IDs from the SharePoint list in a string that looks like this. The core function of the filter array action is to determine if the items in the array meet your criteria. In this particular case, I'm looping through each value specified in the second value field, which is the ID. As it's looping through each ID, it will determine if it exists within the value specified in the first value field, in my case, the string of SharePoint IDs. It's important to note that the order of values entered into the value fields will differ based on your condition argument. For example, if I use the equals to operator, I would insert the column to check in the first value field and insert the value to compare it to in the second value field. When a match is found, the action will collect that item. This is why the output of the filter array action will only contain the items that meet your criteria. What if my SharePoint list contains items that don't exist in my Excel table? If the SharePoint item doesn't exist in my Excel table, I'd like to delete those items from SharePoint. First, I need to add a select action into this scope action. We need to mimic what we did for the SharePoint data earlier. We'll use this select action to pull the custom ID from the Excel data. I'll insert the value dynamic content from the list rows present in a table action. I'll click on this icon to switch to text mode and insert an expression. I'll use the item function, add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. I'll insert ID in all caps. Add a join action. In the from field, insert the outputs from the select action above. In the join with field, insert a comma and a space. Add another filter array action. In the from field, I'll insert the value dynamic content from the get items action. In the first value field, insert the outputs from the join action that contain the IDs from the Excel table. Change the operator to does not contain. In the second value field, insert the email ID dynamic content from the get items action. It's important to note that I'm not using the SharePoint ID dynamic content because that information isn't stored in the Excel table. In my Excel sheet, I'll delete 3 rows of data that have already been added to my SharePoint list. Add a compose action. I'll use this compose action to store the number of items returned from the filter array action above. Insert an expression. Use the length function. Insert the body outputs from the filter array action above. Let's run a test. This filter array action should return 3 items that need to be deleted from SharePoint. The output of this filter array action has all the items that need to be deleted from the SharePoint list. Now that our filter array actions are filtering out all the appropriate data, we need to add additional actions to this flow. I'm going to have both filter array actions running parallel to each other. Add a parallel branch and drag this filter array and compose action over. For the SharePoint items that need to be deleted, we'll need to add a delete item action. Before we do this, to prevent this flow from failing, add a condition. We'll use this condition to check to see if any items need to be deleted. I'll insert the outputs from the compose action that contains the number of items returned from this filter array action. I'll leave this as is equal to and enter a 0. If there aren't any items returned, we'll do nothing. In the no branch, I'll add the delete item action. We'll come back to this action in a minute. Under this filter array action, I'll mimic what I've done on that side. In this no branch, I'll add a create item action. When you use a filter array action in your flow, you aren't able to access the dynamic content from the filtered array. You may be tempted to use the dynamic content from the original action that returns the items you are filtering, such as the list rows present in a table action or the get items action. Because I don't have access to the list rows present in a table dynamic content, I'll use the get items action to get my point across. In order to delete a SharePoint item, I need to insert the item ID. If I select the ID from the get items action, you can see that the delete item action is now nested in an apply to each action. Take a look at the items it's looping through. This action is looping through the values returned from the get items action up here, not the filtered values which are contained in this filter array action. I'll delete the value and ID dynamic content. Let's take a look at the outputs from the filter array action. All the content can be accessed with an expression and the value key, which is the red text between the double quotes. In my case, I need the SharePoint ID. I'll use this text here in my expression. First, I'll insert the body outputs from the filter array action of the SharePoint items to delete here. In the ID field, insert an expression. We'll use the item function to access the current item being looped through. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. I'll insert capital I and D to return the SharePoint item ID. I'll add an apply to each action in this no branch and pull the create item action into it. Add the body outputs from the filter array action of Excel data to add here. I'll use the same expression for each field I want to import. In SharePoint, I'll delete the file I just added. Let's give this a test. Let's check the SharePoint list. It's added 23 items to my SharePoint list and has removed 3. I have a total of 47 items. Don't forget to turn on the concurrency control in your apply to each actions to optimize your flow. If you are setting variables within your apply to each action, leave the concurrency control off. In this flow, I have a get all lists and libraries action. The outputs of this action list 3 keys: name, display name, and type. Lists have a type of 100 and document libraries have a type of 101. Even with an apply to each and condition action, you can't filter out by type. These are the only dynamic properties available to select from. Delete the apply to each action and add a filter array action. In the from field, insert the value dynamic content from the get all lists and libraries action. In the first value field, we're going to add an expression. Use the item function. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Enter type with a capital T in between the single quotes to match the key from the outputs. Leave the operator as is equal to. I want to return just the document libraries. Sometimes the filter array action doesn't work the way you think it should. Let me show you. I'll enter a 101 into the second value field and run a test. No results are returned. The type is stored as a string and not an integer. The condition argument in the filter array action looks okay, but if we click on Edit in Advanced mode, you can see that the number isn't wrapped in single quotes. This means it's actually passing an integer value. We need to edit this expression so single quotes wrap the number. Don't try to type in this editor as your cursor will jump around. Instead, copy this expression to your clipboard and paste it into a text editor. Ensure that there is a single quote on either side of the number. Copy the expression to your clipboard and paste it back into the action. Lastly, add a compose action to store the number of items returned from the filter array action. Use the length function and insert the body outputs from the filter array action above. Let's test it out again. Now it's returning all the document libraries. You can apply the same concept to filter out different actions by using the key from the outputs of the action. The advanced mode in the filter array action will also allow you to filter arrays with multiple conditions. I'll cover this near the end of the video, or skip ahead with the timestamp listed in the description box below. Whenever you use a filter array action, it's always a good idea to add a condition action to check if any items have been returned. Because I've used a compose action above to store the number of items returned, I'll insert that into my condition action. I'll keep the operator as is equal to and enter a 0. If no items are returned from the filter array action, I'll do nothing. If items are returned, I'll insert actions into the no branch. To loop through items returned from the filter array action, insert the body outputs from the filter array action into and apply to each action. Use compose actions to store the values that you need for the rest of the actions in your flow. I would recommend running tests to confirm the outputs of these compose actions before adding any additional actions to your flow. This will help to speed up your flow building as compose actions take very little time to run. For this example, I'll add 2 compose actions, one to store the name and the other to store the display name of the document library being looped through. Those outputs for the filter array action are actually available to select from the dynamic content list. Usually, the only actions available are the body and item. If that's the case, you will need to use an expression to access the dynamic content from your filter array action as we did in the first example. I'll add another compose action to show you what that looks like. Use the item function. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Insert the key from the filter array outputs to access the dynamic content in between the single quotes. In this example, I'll enter display name with a capital D and N as it appears in the filter array output. Run a test. As you can see, both these compose actions have the exact same output. The actions that include a filter query field, such as the get items and get file properties only action, can't filter items and files with the contains operator. Let me show you. In the client's document library of my SharePoint site, there are meeting minutes in each of these client folders. In this custom view, I can filter out all the meeting minute files. I want to return a list of meeting minutes from this month only. The file name syntax makes this easy as I can filter out the meeting minute files that contains meeting minutes _2023-08 in the file name. In my Power Automate flow, if I try to use a contains operator in the filter query field, the flow fails because it's an invalid expression. I'll use a filter array action instead. In the from field, insert the value dynamic content from the action above. In the first value field, I'll select the name dynamic content. Change the operator to contains. In the second value field, I'll insert the string of text I'd like to search for. Lastly, add a compose action to store the number of items returned from the filter array action. Use the length function and insert the body outputs from the filter array action above. Let's test it out. You can make this flow dynamic by using a dynamic date instead. I'll add a compose action above the filter array action. I'll enter the meeting minutes and underscore, and I'll insert an expression. We'll use the UTC-now function to get the current date and time. Wrap that with a format date time function. Place your cursor inside the closing bracket and add a comma and single quotes. Enter your date format in the single quotes. I'll delete this text and replace it with the outputs from the compose action above. Run another test. It's important to note that if you are comparing strings of text, the cases must match. I'll change these m's to lowercase and run another test. This test didn't return any results. To avoid any case sensitivity issues, wrap the dynamic content in a toLower function. This will convert all the text to lowercase. Click on Edit in Advanced mode. I'll copy this expression to my clipboard and paste it into a text editor. I'll wrap the dynamic content in a to-lower function. I'll copy this text and paste it back into the filter array action. Let's run another test. The condition action is user-friendly and intuitive to use. However, did you know that the condition action has a limit of 10 conditions? Also, it's inefficient to loop through the entire list and run a condition check on every item. The filter array action can be a bit deceiving as it looks like it can only handle one condition. With the advanced editor, you can use an expression to filter by multiple conditions. For this demo, I want to filter out the employees who have manager in their title and their birthday is in 7 days. To help you better understand the expression, start in the basic mode. I already have a compose action that contains a dynamic date, which is 7 days from now. In the filter array action, I'll insert the value dynamic content from the get items action. In the first value field, I'll insert the birth date dynamic content. I'll change the operator to contains, and I'll insert the outputs from the compose action that contains my dynamic date. Click on Edit in Advanced Mode. I'll copy this to my clipboard and paste it into a text editor. I'll switch back to basic mode and compose my next condition. In the first value field, I'll insert the job title dynamic content. I'll leave the operator as contains, and I'll enter the word manager in lowercase. I'll convert the dynamic content to lowercase in a minute. Click on Edit in Advanced Mode and copy the expression to your clipboard and paste it into the text editor. First, I'll remove the @ symbol from both of these expressions. Add a comma to separate the conditions. Next, I'll wrap the job dynamic content in a to-lower function to convert the job title to lowercase. Place your cursor at the start of the expression and add back one @ symbol. Wrap the entire expression with the AND function. For an OR condition, wrap your entire expression in an OR function. I'll copy this expression to my clipboard and paste it back into the filter array action. Don't forget to add a compose action to store the number of items returned from the filter array action. Let's run a test. What other Power Automate actions would you like me to cover in more detail? Let me know in the comments down below. If this video helped you better understand how to use the filter array action, please consider giving it a like. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any other Power Automate action tips and tricks. Thanks for watching.